Hello, my fellow witches, sorcerers, and other magical practitioners. My name is Aiden, and today we have a special guest, Fel The Blithe. On Fel's channel, we actually discuss deity relationships, so after this video, please go check that out. But over here, we're going to be talking about Reconstructionism versus NeoPaganism. I'll link the videos either in the card or in the description, whichever you prefer. So yeah, let's get into it. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Fel.
Hi, yeah, I'm Fel The Blithe. I guess now, most known for being like a Hellenic polytheist YouTuber. I'm a Hellenic polytheist. I actually tend to identify with the term revivalist. We'll probably touch on a little bit about what that means, but definitely when it comes to like compared to most pagans, I look very recon, and like I do have a lot of stock in tradition and all of that. I came from modern witchcraft. I used to be New Age, and then I was pseudo Wiccan, and then I was a modern witch for quite a while, and then I became a Hellenic polytheist and kind of don't identify with witch anymore. But I've been around the community and have seen like a lot of different things and have experienced kind of the whole spectrum in some ways. Um, yeah, that's me, I guess.
So like you had mentioned, for you, like traditions, like something that you very much value, and that kind of goes directly into our first point. Tradition versus modern practice. Does tradition make something more real? Does tradition make something more valuable, or is there more value in modern practice, or is there kind of like that whole discourse? Kind of my stance on that is tradition obviously has value, but it's not. It's obviously not the be all end all of everything, end all be all of everything. But I will say that a traditional practice that's been done for a longer time is probably going to have more um, more bits and pieces to it that have built up over time. It's been worked with more, tested more, has more influence than, say, a modern practice created last week.
Yeah, that
That's
makes
precious.
sense to me. I sometimes can be I know that I can be a little bit too much of a traditionalist. I also work in like the historical field, no longer full time, but I did for a while, and so like history has always been a huge love of mine, and also clearing up historical misconceptions, which I literally got paid to do. So it's also one of my favorite things. There's a lot of historical misconceptions, and I I guess for me, like, it's not that I don't put any stock in modern things, because I think what people forget, even if they're coming from a recon tradition, recon being a shorthand for reconstruction, is that reconstructionism is still modern, right? People kind of hate to hear that, but it's true. I'm not actually an ancient Greek person living in ancient Greece. If I was, you probably wouldn't hear from me because I'm AFAB. So just pretend I don't exist. So it's impossible to reconstruct the culture that surrounds the ancient reconstructed religion. So reconstruction, the goal of reconstruction is to reconstruct a tradition into your modern society. So I don't think tradition does not necessarily make it realer, but there is something that is very validating when you have a UPG, which we're going to discuss, like an unverified
Yes.
person knows this. When you have something that you're like, oh, this is what I feel, and then you look into history and it's confirmed. There is something about that because it feels like it has validity. Because we talked a lot about this in our deity relationships video, but this idea of discernment is huge, and I think for me, I find that traditional religions are easier to discern what is real and what is just in my head because there is a tradition behind it.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point. That a lot of the more traditional religions, they have like a basis of this is what we understand. This is kind of the facts, being a loose term, that we kind of built everything out of, and it just kind of goes up from there. Whereas with more neo-pagan traditions, it's kind of like we have this loose understanding of how things are built. This is kind of like our loose idea of practice. And I think one thing I do think that happens way too much in neo-pagan spaces is this idea of everything's valid, or like everything's kind of whatever you want it to be, and there's no true experience. But then at the same time, people will also be like, oh, your experience isn't valid because my experience goes against that, or your experience doesn't work because it doesn't work in my framework.
Right.
I see that kind of back and forth a lot. And I think it actually weirdly circles back around to you need historical validation. Even like if the history isn't like ancient history, it's more recent history, or even like this person said it on a Tumblr post, so therefore it connects to my UPG. Not that Tumblr's like an invalid source, because I have a whole thing about sources, but but no, I think that a lot of people will kind of weirdly circle back around to it needs to have some basis in something, even when it's a modern tradition, which is something that I don't inherently disagree with, because I think you should have a basis for something, but it's also kind of a weird thing when you're making a new tradition to be based, need validation from another tradition that already exists.
I mean, I think, like, you see people all the time on, like, and, like, I don't want to say TikTok because, obviously, like, everyone always talks about TikTok, but I saw this before TikTok, too, even. People will be like, I'm a chaos magician. Spoiler alert, they're not. That's its own paradigm. People will be, like, just throwing random stuff together. That's, like, not... First of all, not chaos magic. But
Yeah.
I also think, in terms of everything needing a backing, I mean, nothing is created in a vacuum. Nothing. So,
Right.
my UPG with rosemary, for example, as an herb, is going to be colored by my own cultural understanding of rosemary. So, like, I don't think you can ever really, like, it would be such a, just such a mind-bending time in order to try to create something that is totally new without any preconceived notions, because I don't think it's true, or I don't think it's possible,
Right.
because everything comes from something. So I think that's, yeah, there's a weird thing, because it's like everything is valid, but, like, I feel like that's how I often kind of view that. Like, UPG, something that you come up with, something that is part of your personal practice, is definitely like a huge part. I mean, religion is personal, right? Your spirituality is
Yes.
personal. But at the same time, discernment, like, if sometimes it's weird. People will sometimes divorce deities from their cultural context. And we talked
Yeah.
about soft versus hard polytheism in our video. And in some ways, even when people feel like they're being super hard polytheistic, where they're like, I think Athena and Minerva are completely different, but then they're also like, but Athena is helping me, is helping heal my sickness. And it's almost like then they're very hard polytheist, but then they kind of divorce them from any of their cultural associations. Like, Athena would not likely, at least solely, be called in for healing. That is not something she's traditionally associated with. So then that kind of becomes a bit odd, of divorcing something from their cultural context, which I don't think is correct, really.
Right. No, that happens a lot within neo-pagan circles, actually. It's a really hot button topic with Wicca specifically, where it's like Wicca takes everything from Celtic paganism, which is a bad term. We're not going to get into that right here, right now, but it takes things from Celtic paganism and just kind of reflavors Thelema to be Celtic font, as some people would put it.
Celtic font. That's so funny. So true. Yeah. But even when it comes to like Wicca, I mean, people like to Wicca bash. And like say
Yeah,
what
I'm
you
not
will
like
about Wicca. Yeah. Say what you will about Wicca, but at least Wicca is like a constructed magical tradition as opposed to like it's not just like Gerald Gardner's happy fun time, you know. It
right,
is a real religion with like real rules that were inspired by things like Thelema and Celtic paganism and has a whole bunch of other influences that like Gardner was consciously pulling from it.
right,
It wasn't I mean he said some dumb things like a bunch of people naked ladies in the woods taught me. But it wasn't like he was just like talking out of his ass entirely. Like he
right.
did actually have reasons for doing certain things. And I think sometimes, you know, the idea of like Athena helped heal my sickness is just that's there's a fine line between adapting something for your own personal culture and divorcing things from their culture. Like you
Yes.
see this talk a lot about by Irish pagans, especially Irish pagans who are from Ireland. There's a certain cultural understanding that isn't very important to the Irish deities. And so like saying that I'm going to have dinner with Namorrigan or like Namorrigan is going to help me I don't know, do well on my test. It often kind of feels a little bit like you're divorcing Namorrigan from cultural context, which is
Yeah,
very important in a lot of cases.
yeah. And also, it's very disingenuous to the original culture. Um,
Mm-hmm.
to just kind of take something and be like, um, Babalue is helping me
Oh
to
no.
um, pass my math test or my English. Babalue is helping me to pass my English test.
Oh no. Ooh no.
That would no, that would not fly.
No.
Um, and there's a lot of issues within people trying to paganize African traditional religions in general, but um,
Right.
I I think that we need to be a lot more careful about the cultures that we kind of use take from is a little bit too strong. I feel because we don't.
Yeah. Right. Like nothing
But
exists in a vacuum. Yeah.
right, right. But like we use the imagery, the symbolism, the ideas, the concepts from these cultures, so they need to be respected in the way that they were respected in that culture. You can't just kind of take bits and pieces and say, I like this spirit, she's cool, so I'm gonna use her for whatever I want.
Right.
Um,
Oftentimes, there's a lot of discourse that happens in the Hellenic polytheist community. It's funny because we all kind of look a little bit unified, but we're really not. There's a lot of arguing that happens, and like there's a lot of arguments too around the idea of like cleanliness and like miasma
mm,
specifically. So cleanliness is very important in a lot of ancient traditions, but it is also
yes.
important in Hellenic polytheism and this idea of when do you need to clean. Some people are like extreme and they're like if you swear you have to brush your teeth before speaking to the gods. So some
I do
people
that.
go like very yeah. Oh really? There you
Yeah, well,
go.
when I do Solomonic magic,
Yeah.
I refuse to swear, and if I do swear, I like do like cleansings afterwards.
Right. I mean so certain yeah, it definitely makes sense I think in certain ritual contexts.
Yeah.
But it's this kind of idea of when is certain things necessary because it's like certain things like I
Mm,
have gone through like very extreme cleanliness like catharsis process that I wouldn't just do on my day to day because you know I'm not
right.
murdering people. I don't need to clean myself like that, you know. So there often is discourse around like how often you need to clean yourself, and they're like, if you don't do this, it's hubris. Everyone loves to throw around the term hubris in the helpful community. Everyone's like,
I,
it's
s-
hubris, it's an offense to the god, and I'm like, okay, calm down.
I see that so
Sometimes I think
often.
they're right, but
Yeah.
most of the time it's a little bit much. Oh,
Yeah.
usually it's the most hot button issue is magic hubris. Um,
Oh, yeah. I
that's
see.
a discussion. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
um, yeah. So you see people kind of throw around these terms. It's hard because Hellenic polytheism and recon traditions are recon. They're reconstructed, so they're not.
Right.
Again, they're reconstructed by modern people in the modern age. So some like people who identify more with recons, oftentimes they say that their goal is that to look something similar to as similar as they can to what the ancient Greeks were doing. So like if someone from ancient Greece came here, they would recognize. That is what I've seen some recons say that the goal of Reconstructionism is. Something more like revivalism, and I don't even like identify a hard split between the two of them. I don't think there is. Revivalism is more like you know, sometimes I add things from modern witchcraft into my practice. Or, for example, I live in an area where it snows. And a lot of the recon, like the parts that people reconstruct in ancient Greece, it didn't snow.
Right.
Or it would snow like once. So, like, I get brutal winters here. So sometimes I will take in aspects of Norse paganism. Very little, but sometimes I take in aspects of that. Or I'll actually usually take in more stuff from modern witchcraft during the winter time because there's nothing for me to reconstruct from
Yeah.
Athens in the winter, by and large, you know?
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's something that NeoPaganism does a lot of, actually, is it takes like um various ideas. But the Wheel of the Year, I'll just say that pretty
Right.
much. Like Wheel of the Year is based around a bunch of different holidays that kind of vaguely relate in a wheel that is what we have today. I'm not going to get into the whole history of
Mm-hmm.
it because I deep dived into that a while ago, but
It's very
um,
interesting.
it's very interesting. No, it's fascinating, especially like considering like, anyways. But I think that especially like with the more recent idea of adapting the wheel to year of the year to your own personal practice is something that neo-paganism does a lot. Is it takes different
Mm-hmm.
ideas that you can relate to yourself and to your surroundings, your environment, what your needs are, and making it work for you instead of trying to be like very hard line. And I'm not saying like all reconstruction, obviously, because you're not like that, but
Right.
um, it's very different than kind of trying to hardline. This is how this was here, so I have to do it exactly how I am here.
Right, right. Like, there are no, it's not that there's no, like, deities associated with snow and Hellenism, but by and large, they're not. It's like they're associated with storms, which could be snow. So I often have to make, like, rely on my own UPG or shared personal gnosis. I mean, I guess that's probably a good time to talk about those
Yeah,
things.
yeah. Let's jump into that. UPG, VPG, and SPG. So unverified personal gnosis, shared personal gnosis, and verified personal gnosis. Those are kind of like the three terms I hear the most. UPG is the most common one, but I hear the other two as well. I am planning on making a video on UPG entirely, but I won't get too deep into it here. But I kind of believe that UPG is essential to religion because if you
Mm-hmm.
aren't, religion is an experience. It's not a stagnant thing. You're not supposed to be in one place forever. You're supposed to grow with it. You're supposed to evolve with it, and you're supposed to make changes, learn things more, understand something deeper. Because when you first start practicing or believing in the religion, you're not going to know everything about
Right.
the spirits, the traditions, the mysteries, etc. Um, you're supposed to grow with it, so your practice is going to change over time, and also your understanding is going to change over time. Because, like for example, my understanding of Thelema is very different from when I was a Thelemite to when I am now as a not Thelemite.
Right.
Um, and just the law and how that all works, it's different, and it's my personal experience, my personal gnosis I have with that. Um, which is essential, especially like in neo-paganism, to have UPG to have your personal gnosis, but it's also important to not overstep that and then say
Right.
my gnosis is fact because I said so and my experience says so.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's UPG, and I've had arguments on both sides where some people are like, everything is UPG, so therefore Athena can mean whatever I want, and I'm like, I don't know about that. And then had other people who were like, only like, because I had a TikTok very briefly. I'm still on TikTok. I'm not gonna link it though because I only have like 2 videos, and on one of them I basically made a song, and it was essentially like, if your UPG can't be, or if you run a Discord server and your UPG can't be questioned, and what was it for UPG? And you ban all nuanced discussions, it might not be a Discord server but a cult. Um, and someone in the comments was just like, "Oh well, like all UPG is stupid," and I was like, "Well, hold up, no, you're wrong. That also doesn't make sense."
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes people feel very strongly one way or the other, where either everything 100% is true versus SPG, and like, or versus like it has to be verified. Some people swing pretty strongly. I tend to like verified gnosis, but I don't know. I think there's also like Hecate is an extremely interesting example.
Yes.
I recently did a video on her, and how she is viewed in classical Greece is like nothing compared to what she is now. And a lot of that stuff came about because of the ancient mystery cults in the Hellenistic period. And then it just kind of became its own thing. And I really go back and forth. I struggle a lot with Hecate because it's just one of those things where there is so much conflict between UPG, SPG, and verified gnosis. Because it's like, when does it become verified gnosis is the other question. And I think that's seen a lot with Hecate. Modern Hecate worship versus like people who worship Hecate as part of common Hellenism. There's a very stark difference, and they often get into arguments.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
I've seen some on Reddit, and I'm just like, oh, yikes, everyone calm down. Where people say, like, oh, well, yours is not valid because it's not historical. Then it's like, well, when does it become historical?
Right.
When does it become valid? And I think also sometimes people forget that the divine has agency in a lot of ways. So who's to say that Hecate is not just revealing another part of herself? And I have this problem with Apollo too. So Apollo traditionally is not associated with the sun. A lot of people don't know that. He's not a sun god.
Yeah.
Traditionally. However, by the Hellenistic period, he had started being syncretized with Helios and Sol. But he was still by and large not a sun god, and really didn't become one until the Renaissance, when they just kind of, I don't know, decided to, like, say, bye Helios. And then just gave all of Helios' symbols to Apollo.
Yeah.
So it's like, when does that become... Like, does that mean that Apollo is still not a sun god? I don't view him as a sun god for my own personal praxis. But I used to be, like, really belligerent about it, be like, he's not a sun god. But then I kind of was like, well... Like, I did see him as a sun god, and then I didn't. And where is that line between shared gnosis, personal gnosis, things that are false, and verified gnosis?
Yeah, I think it's difficult to say. I think verified gnosis is the most difficult one to actually put a pin in because...
Define, yeah.
Yeah. Like, who's verifying it? Like, no one,
right.
No one can verify God, like...
Right. And, like, even within, like, living traditions that are more orthodoxic, like Catholicism, like, you get 2 Italian Catholics in a room, and then just watch what happens.
Right?
Like, it is not... Or, like, two Italian Catholic neighborhoods will have different...
Oh, yeah.
versions of different views of the Madonna. Like, it's not so cut and dry. And again, it's like, people say this, and I have I have varying feelings on it. When people say everything was once UPG, and I have some like yes and no feelings about that. Like there is some validity. I think everything was once shared personal gnosis, I think is a better
Yeah.
way of saying it. Because sometimes things do happen spontaneously, where everyone comes to the same conclusion at once. But yeah, I think UPG, SPG, and verified gnosis are all kind of blend into each other in weird ways.
Yeah, they all kind of have weird overlaps in different ways, and they make, you can't have one without the other, obviously, but like, I'm trying to find like a good word.
Yeah, it's like I don't think you can ever have any religion, any personal religion, without any personal gnosis.
Right. You can't.
It was interesting. The classicists have learned that we read their texts for religious reasons, which was a wild. I'll send it to you if you want to link it. It's a very wild read where this classicist Sarah Iles Johnson was like, "Oh yeah, we know that like Hellenic polytheists read our stuff as religious material," and I was like, "Oh god, they know we exist."
We've been out.
But so she was like, she was like analyzing us from a classicist perspective. It was very funny, and she was saying how like, so a 100% VG recon would be a classicist. They would just be a classicist. And she pointed out how she was like, all like Hellenic polytheists take our work and then adapt it for themselves, which is personal gnosis. Like she was saying how like some people, they worship Dionysus, but they don't want to, if they have children, you know, they're not going to give their children wine.
Right.
Like boatloads of wine, so they'll substitute grape juice or something. And she's like, to the classicists, that's like false. But to a religious person, that is the continuation of that verified gnosis.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. Like the idea of continuation, the idea of adapting for the modern time, that makes a lot more sense. Because again, you're not in the culture to have the same exact experiences, the same exact practices. Because also because a lot of things I've noticed, breaking a little bit out of the neo-pagan side and more into the general occultist side, is a lot of people who are doing these practices now would not be doing them in the times that they were actually practiced.
No.
Like there are several Solomonic practitioners who are AFAB. You wouldn't have been doing any practices because you when you have access to them, you would just not have access to them, period, because they're impossible to find. And so they were like, women can't do magic for XYZ reason.
Or whatever reason.
Yeah. Pick your reason that week. And I think it's obviously a good thing that people have access to these things now, but it's also interesting when people try to be like super diehard, like, I have to do it exactly this way. Or else it wouldn't work. It's like, well, you're already doing it wrong in their eyes, so why do you have to skin a lion and behead a sheep in the specific river and have it flow a certain way? It's like
right. Yeah, like I come from, I also am a part of the like historical costuming community, and that discourse shows up a lot there too. And someone pointed out like it is impossible to be historically accurate. It's 100% impossible to be 100% historically accurate because the way our fabric is made is simply not the same. It's simply not the same. And like that's why sometimes like I get annoyed at sometimes when costumes are historically inaccurate, but I also get annoyed at the people who get like up in arms about it. I'm just like, y'all, it's called artistic decisions. Calm down. But yeah, like even in like the historical costuming community, a lot of people will put an emphasis on like getting the silhouette right. Because it's actually the silhouette that makes the historical piece rather than the specific fabrics. So if you have an ahistorical silhouette, but historical fabrics, it'll still look weird. Even to people who are like the untrained eye.
Yeah.
But if you have the correct historical silhouette, it'll still read a certain way, even if you use ahistorical fabrics. And I think that relates in a lot of ways to Reconstructionism and UPG versus SPG. If like, so verified gnosis would be using 100% linen and this crazy silhouette, and it's made on your loom that was cut by an alder tree or something. I don't
Yeah.
know. And then like something in the middle would be more like the historical silhouette, but I'm going to wear, it's going to be a camo print dress. I don't know. Obviously not accurate, but it's still the same basic shape. And then something that's totally UPG based would just be like essentially like Barbie fantasy movies
Yes.
where there's no historical accuracy whatsoever, and it's all about the artistic vision.
Right. The vibe.
Yeah. The vibe, yeah. Which is like, there is something to be said for those things, but they're all there to serve a different purpose. You know, like no one is going to watch a Barbie movie, I don't think, and lament the fact that Barbie is not in, I don't know, a 13th century Giornia.
Right.
Like, no one's going to say that.
No, I definitely agree with that. And I think that, again, relates to neo-paganism, where people are trying to, where you can't, we're talking back with the divorcing thing, there we go. There's a difference between divorcing something from its original cultural context and emanating it, or emulating it, that's the word. Trying to emulate it, but within your own context, your own cultural context.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of get this idea of, we get this like idea over here, where over here meaning in America, where we have like that with I'm in America, so I have that kind of idea of American spirituality and American neo-paganism, but we get this kind of emulated idea of certain deities, certain spirits, and we get kind of this alternative version of them, but it's still working in the same way, not the same way, but similar way to how it was culturally recognized.
Right.
Like, you wouldn't be going to a temple or anything, but you would have your home altar, which would serve a similar function. You would be like using incense, because incense was used historically several times in several different cultures, as a form of communication, as a form of offering. Suffumigation is hugely important cross-culturally for many different reasons. I'm actually going to link a video in the description about that, because I think it's really interesting. But you can take these ideas and emulate them for modern practice without destroying the culture that they came from.
Right. Right, and it's a very fine line, and you see this in people who like identify as Hellenic polytheists. It's like all over the map. I sometimes get a little bit annoyed when people identify as Hellenic polytheists, but then like don't do anything that's related to Hellenism, like the historical religion, just because the term Hellenic polytheist has come to mean not just like I'm a neo-pagan, but it usually refers to a Reconstruction tradition. So I sometimes get annoyed when people are like, I'm a Hellenic polytheist, and then they're like, but I'm astral projecting with Asmodeus, and Athena's helping me. Yeah, I've seen that. And Athena's helping me with my illness. Yeah, it's just then it's like, well, you're just a pagan. You're just like a neo-pagan, an eclectic pagan, which is fine to be, but don't identify yourself as part of this community. Yeah.
Right. I think the connecting yourself to certain communities is also something that a lot of people within the pagan community need to be better about. Like, the amount of times I have met people who have identified as Wiccan and were never actually doing anything Wiccan has frustrated me.
Yeah.
I can go into like the idea of what Wicca is nowadays being completely different from what Gardner or even Alexander's thought it was, but
yeah,
I see a lot of different things. Like, the thing I would put a pin in was, I remember talking with someone um he identified as a soft pagan, and that's what his term was. But he was talking about how the Morrigan has a sacred river near where we live. I live on the East Coast in America. I don't know of any sacred rivers in Ireland that relate to Morrigan in America. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's odd when that's sort of thing happens. Um, I think another thing too that I wish, like, a lot of people, even when they consider themselves fully modern, eclectic witches or pagans, they often don't know the
yes,
history of what they're doing. And like, it's not like everyone needs to be a
right,
historical scholar. Like, I am impartial to religious studies, and historical. Like,
yeah,
obviously, that's just kind of what I'm all about. But like the amount of times, so like in my podcast I'm a part of, Test Tubes and Cauldrons, we talk about the history of certain things, and almost every time the answer is either theosophy or
yeah,
spiritualism. Every time. And like the amount of times people will do things and not realize that it's actually new age. People will like dunk on the new age movement, which I do too. I have very strong
yes,
opinions on the new age movement. But then they like will talk about the clairs, or they'll talk about astral projection, not realizing that astral projection is, I notice there's two definitions. There's people who use it in the traditional, more thelemic viewpoint of astral projection, and then there's people who use the new age. I see way more common
yeah,
the new age version of astral projection, but people don't realize where they come from and the history behind them. And like that doesn't necessarily invalidate their experiences, but like people don't understand that some of these things were made by spiritualists to be
yes.
charlatans.
And the Clares are the ones that like get me the most.
I see it a lot with the clairs. Like people don't realize the clairs are not pagan in origin. They are uh, theosophical and spiritualist in origin, and are specifically ripped from Jainism
Mm,
and other like especially Indian traditions, which is a whole can of worms.
yes,
Because the people who were doing the ripping were usually English
yep,
Victorians. Not good. Not good. So that's the other thing that gets me is when people don't realize the history behind certain things. Like, astral projection is not just closing your eyes and dissociating,
no, it's
or
not.
maladaptive daydreaming, or like visualizing. That's not astral projection. It's, in many cases, historical soul projection
Yeah,
is considered like a death like experience.
yeah,
Yeah, it's considered very difficult and very taxing on one's soul.
yeah. No, there's a bunch of different traditions that have what we would call astral projection, but
Mm,
it's not like anyone describes. Like I said this in your video, but a lot of things in the occult aren't what the way people describe them usually are. Mostly because the occult inherently is veiling in nature. It will
right.
veil things for you, and you will have to unveil it for yourself. Which is also another issue that
I
I
don't
see
like that.
people have.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I see a lot of people have this issue in the occult where they kind of expect people to tell them how something's going to work or how to do something, which is, I understand it from a beginner's perspective, but as you go along, you kind of need to drop that. And I see a lot of people just don't drop that. And that's something I see a lot more in the witchy spaces that kind of get overlapped with
Right.
NeoPaganism, where also the whole notion of you need to be a witch to be a neo-pagan or vice versa
Right.
don't. Um, but the idea that you need to have someone tell you to do something, or you need like a book to tell you to do something. Like books are great. I'm planning on writing a book. I'm not anti-book. Don't want to ever put that message out there, but you don't need a book to tell you what to do. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um,
Right. Like there was an interesting point I noticed in my path when I just kind of stopped reading the vast majority of books because a lot of them are beginner centric.
Yes.
And like I had this realization, I was like, oh, I'm like only reading. Like yesterday to Thanksgiving dinner, I brought light reading. It was Pausanias' Guide to Greece 1. And my mom was like, what are you doing? I was like, it's just some light reading. So it's like it gets to a certain point, you know, where you kind of stop reading a lot of witchy books because a lot of them are beginner centric.
Yeah.
But also are frustrating to read.
Extraordinarily.
But you like tend to move on to things. And it's like there's not a lot of advanced books because kind of the more advanced stuff is personal.
Yeah. Yeah, no one can tell you how to do anything once you get to a certain point. Like, once you have an established practice, I've noticed that, like, you kind of just pick up on things instead of you have someone tell you how to do things. And I don't think you can really be told how to do a lot of things. In general, like, even
Right.
as a beginner, it's like, okay, here's, like, the structure of it, but, like, you actually have to do it. You have to actually do it. I don't, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. It comes when you can't read. I mean, that is a big thing in the Hellenic polytheist community. It's a big problem of people doing too much reading and not enough
Yeah.
doing. And sometimes it's like, well, what differentiates you from a classicist at that point? You know, someone who just reads about Hellenic polytheism is literally just a classicist.
Right.
That's yeah. If they don't do anything, then you're not a Hellenic polytheist. You're like I said, you're literally just a classicist. It was funny. I mean, I went through a bunch of videos that I had to do a ton of research for, so I like really wasn't doing anything. And it was also a crazy time. There was just so many things I was doing, and I like stopped really practicing because I just kind of didn't. I don't know. I just didn't have time.
Right.
And I was like, why can I no longer feel the divine? And then I was like, oh, because I haven't made an offering in like 3 weeks. And then I made an offering. I was like, oh, yeah. Okay, that's why. So it's kind of one of those things you have to do it. And again, with like Reconstructionism, like these books can tell you how the ancients did it, but a lot of them are very lacking unless you're looking at like Plato. A lot of them are very lacking in the theory. And Plato is not a god. He's not an end-all be-all. Like, everyone loves to argue with Plato, including Plato. Like, you know, you have to come up with your own reasoning for things. Like, someone asked in a Discord, like, how do offerings work? And they weren't just asking, like, how to make an offering. They were asking, like, the theory of how do offerings work. And I was like, gotta answer that yourself. You can ask everybody and they'll all have a different opinion. But it's hard because you want clear-cut answers, because in a lot of mainstream religions you're given them.
Right.
But that's not the case with most pagan traditions.
Right, yeah. A lot of the traditions aren't going to just hand you the answers. And even within mainstream religions and religious traditions, you're still
Right.
not being handed all the answers. When you're actively engaging with the religion, if you're just kind of a casual fan of Jesus, then you're not going to be seeking anything super deep other than what a pastor tells you at church, just from my experience being around Catholics. But
Right.
I was someone who always engaged deeper. I was someone who always went deeper. I joined a lot of youth groups and discussions, and I even became in charge of them, but that's a whole other backstory for later. But yeah, no, the idea that you need to have like an authority figure tell you something is something that I think a lot of people carry over when they leave Christianity or another mainstream structured religion. I'm saying structured, not organized for specific reasons, but when people move over, they tend to like bring those ideas over and kind of implant them on this. I saw some video about this analyzing exactly why that happens. I remember nothing from it though, or even what video it was. I could have dreamed it, honestly.
Was it? I know Ocean Keltoy did a video on latent Christianity.
Maybe it was that one. I can't remember.
I don't know.
But the idea that they kind of take these ideas that they have always grown up with and just kind of implant them onto these new faces is something that's always
Very common.
it's something that's always kind of not rubbed me the wrong way necessarily, but it's been interesting. I've seen that. Um, I'm going to be very careful about it because it does come from a place of familiarity, and ease of access, but it's something that I think a lot of people need to kind of recognize within themselves. I think that especially like morality is something that gets kind of pushed into it, and I'm not going to say that you need to like completely dissolve your morals when you switch religions, but there are some morals that people have that if you're practicing another religion, it will change if you want to like follow those morals, those religious values.
Right. I think I don't remember which video of mine I talked about this. I think it might have been our deities advanced video, about how you need to deconstruct before you can
Yes.
reconstruct. And like I did that, well, by force, but I like I had no option to, because I was like, if I just try to jump in, it's just gonna be bad.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are so longing for something more, especially when they're leaving a toxic religious community or religious family culture, that they jump head first into another thing without taking time to question and think about what they really want in a
Right.
religion. Like, if you come right from fundamentalism and jump into Hellenism, like, you're going to take half of fundamentalism with you, even if you don't want to. And it won't even necessarily look bad. Like, it'll feel familiar, but it can often be detrimental to you and the community
Yeah.
in the long run. So you have to deconstruct, find out what is my belief, what is their belief, what do I want to take with me, and what do I want to leave behind.
Right.
Yeah, like the idea of a heavy, super personal God that's omnipresent, omniscient, and will sit with you is a very, like, fundamentalist idea, at least in my experience. I don't know if it's elsewhere too, but it's a very, like, American, like, fundamentalist idea that gets kind of
Yeah.
portered over this idea of a very personal God that will come to you whenever you call them, and you can feel them lifting you up. That is from fundamentalism.
Yeah. No.
People might not like to hear it, but it's true.
Yeah. No. That is. Yeah. It comes. A lot of ideas do come from fundamentalism and Christianity and Catholicism, and it just kind of all gets
Yeah.
blended into it. And I think people just kind of go back to it for comfort, and I know this, so it's right. And they kind of, again, like, take the morality, the framework, and everything, put it back onto something that doesn't have that influence initially, and it kind of gets seeps into the wider community, because, like, there are so many times where I'll hear neo-pagans, like, just say the same Christian rhetoric I grew up with. Like, they're... Some pagans are more Christian than the Christians.
They are. It's so true. Oh man. Like, I think in a lot of ways, interestingly enough, some of the everything is valid rhetoric is actually a very fundamentalist thing, which people don't understand how that can connect. But if fundamentalism is all about the personal God. I mean, they always say it's not a religion, it's a relationship.
Yeah. Oh,
That is like a fundamentalist.
that's so weird. Evoking a lot of memories.
Yeah, it's very much a fundamentalist, like, dog whistle. So a lot of times people will take this idea of, like, it's all about my relationship with the deity, and not my relationship to the greater community as well.
Right.
There's not, like, yeah, fundamentalism is a weird beast, and I could unpack it in like 100,000 videos. But it's funny. I was actually thinking about this the other night. I was like, I've noticed that a lot of everything is valid religions turn out to be cults.
Yeah.
Which is weird. Like, in the New Age, that happens a lot.
Oh God. Yeah.
It's because it's no questioning is allowed. When everything is valid, no questioning is allowed.
Yes.
And when no questioning is allowed, bad things start to happen. Yeah. It's very odd. I've seen some very culty Discord groups that are like everything is valid. And I ended up leaving some of them because I was like, you guys claim that like everything is valid and chill, but then when I like bring up something, everyone is like trying to cancel you, and you're like,
Yeah.
this is a cult. This is not. This is
This is
not
not
a nice
safe.
discussion
No.
group. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of groups end up becoming high control groups or cults or, yeah.
Yeah. It's weird.
It is
It's
really
very
weird.
odd. Because you'd expect something where everything is valid to not become that, but
Right.
it's very much not. It's like they erase all negativity,
Yeah,
and by
toxic
erasing all
positivity.
negativity, you don't. It's yeah, it becomes toxically positive, and then everyone has to smile,
Yeah,
like they're a '50s housewife. It's very scary.
extremely. But yeah, one point that I did want to touch on because I'm noticing the time. One thing I did want to touch on before was like advantages and disadvantages. Um,
Mm-hmm.
like what are the advantages of NeoPaganism versus the advantages of Reconstructionism, and then vice versa, the cons. Um, I think the advantages within NeoPaganism is there is a lot more, like, from what I've seen, there's a lot more experimentation. There's a lot more, like, I won't say freedom necessarily, but more leeway with what you can do and what kinds of things you feel more open to. Because NeoPagan is like a very broad spectrum of so many different things.
Right.
Because you can be like a neo-pagan witch, or you can be like a neo-pagan occultist, magician kind of person. And they will have two completely different practices and beliefs. So I think there's a lot more leeway with what you can do and syncretize and kind of mix into your own practice. But I think on the con side, there's a lot less grounding. There's a lot less focus on this is what actually makes sense. This is what actually is plausible. And a lot of people kind of get ungrounded within neo-pagan communities, and they kind of just spiral from there. I've seen a lot of people get very ungrounded very quickly. Weirdly, more in ceremonial spaces, but that's for a lot of reasons. People get ungrounded, they get a lot of superiority, and like it becomes a lot of back and forth and infighting, which doesn't make sense for a community that's like very. We kind of have all these different things that we all believe, and they don't need to really fit into one thing.
Yeah, I guess in terms of advantages and disadvantages, I mean, advantages to a reconstructed tradition is it's a
Yeah.
backbone. It gives you the structure, so you don't need to worry about like I've met people who have like made their own magical systems, and it's like a crazy amount of work. It's not just like I woke up one day and it all came to me. Like dunk on Gerald Gardner all you want, but it was work. It wasn't just like he woke up one day and decided some things. Like that was very much not the case. Lots of trial and error. And when you are engaging in a reconstructed tradition, you have in a lot of cases scholarly work. Like even in ones that are less common, there's often still some scholarly discussions which are often very they're meant to be as unbiased as possible. Obviously, bias is always a thing in all humans, but they're peer reviewed, literally, so they're peer
Yeah.
reviewed, and they will be very thorough, unlike a lot of like, I don't know, wiccanmama.com. Like,
Yeah.
you know, that there are going to be a lot more impersonal. But then the other thing, I guess the flip side of that disadvantage is because of a lot of things are impersonal. I think sometimes the recon community can have a problem with not wanting anything to any writing to be impersonal. It all has to be about history and not a living tradition. Like sometimes people will dunk on modern Hellenic polytheist books because they're modern and they talk about how to adapt things for a modern path and talk about personal experiences. And I think that's just as important and is sorely missing in a lot of recon
Yeah.
places, is this idea of how to connect it to the modern day and age, because I think a lot of people get lost on that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. It also reminded me of the Pagan Portals book on Hecate.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever read that?
I have not.
It, my friend was reading it, and he
Yeah.
stopped reading it as soon as it said, Hecate is the queen of Elfame.
No. Yeah.
That's the biggest problem with neo-pagan books, I feel, is it's like
Yeah.
too much free range. Too much.
Or it's very much, cite your source, it came to me in a dream. There's needs to be a lot more of a balance,
Yes.
I think.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there's a need for balance. There's a need for people to cite sources, find real sources, have a reason for why things work.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing. Have a reason.
Yes.
Like when, oh gosh, I saw this one person. They were like, Asmodeus and me. They were talking about like, they were like Asmodeus, Raphael, Isis, Hermes, and they also believed in Hades and also Olympus and then also hell and heaven. And I was like, there's just too many conflicting things. Like syncretism is a thing, but I just don't understand how you can reconcile Hades, like the realm of Hades, hell, heaven, and believing in reincarnation. Like you can, but it would take a lot of theory.
Yeah.
I don't think this person had a lot of theory.
That, I mean,
blows my mind.
Already reconciling like the idea of, because like they said that they believe in Asmodeus, that would mean that they're also reconciling the idea of goetic demons existing within those realms. And then, oh my god, that's so much. Oh god, I can't even.
Yeah, there's so much convolution, and they're very hard polytheists too. And I'm just like,
oh no,
my head hurts. My head hurts. Please.
Please, no more.
Like you don't. I guess my final thought, if we want to start doing final thoughts, my final thought is like you don't need to be a scholar. I'm not a scholar. I say that in all of my videos because I feel like people think I'm an authority on something, but I'm not. I'm not an authority on anything. I'm an authority on me and my personal experiences, but I'm not an authority on anything else. And like I'm not a scholar, and you don't have to be a scholar. Also, if you get something wrong, it's fine. Like just because this book doesn't say that Apollo is associated with the color blue doesn't mean that you can't associate Apollo with blue. Yeah, you don't also need to be a philosopher. Like you don't need to have like this dissertation on why you believe what you believe, but it does help to have some discernment so there's not like a lot of cognitive dissonance going on.
Yeah, no, I think that my final thoughts are there needs to be a lot more like grounding within the neo-pagan community. There's gonna be a lot more like we need to have a lot more nuanced discussions about things instead of the everything's valid, which leads into like hive mind, high control, cult mentality. Mm-hmm. But I think that we need to just have more nuanced discussions, more open discussions, and find better balances with things instead of trying to be something new constantly, because it's like everyone has their own magic system that they come up with. Doesn't mean it's the new thing.
Right.
But yeah, no, this was great conversation. Everyone go check out their channel. I'll link it in the description, cards somewhere.
Somewhere, who knows?
And if you have any questions, comments, anything else, leave it in the comments down below. My other information is in my description, my Discord server that's very not active, but join it if you want to. And yeah, thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.